I was still in my work clothes balancing a stack of returned books at the top of the library stairs in a small public school in Texas when my leg gave out. As I stepped down, my foot caught on the worn edge of a stair. A sharp pop tore through my knee, followed by a burning pain that made me lose my balance. I crashed down onto the floor. Books flew in every direction. I hit the hard landing, and the pain stole my breath, my voice, and any sense of control over my body. I tried to stand up, but my leg folded beneath me like wet paper. It no longer felt like it belonged to me. The school nurse rushed me to the emergency room, harsh fluorescent lights blazing overhead. The physician's assistant pulled my MRI up on the screen. "Severe ligament damage," she said. "You need surgery soon. $6,000 if you go private, or you'll have to wait several weeks in the public system. If you delay, you risk a permanent limp, limited mobility, and you may never be able to run again." I nodded, calm on the outside, while a cold, clear awareness spread through me inside. That night, propped up on mismatched pillows in my tiny apartment, my leg wrapped in thick bandages already soaked with blood, I scrolled through my phone until my finger pressed the call button. My father answered, his voice cheerful and distracted. I spoke flatly and briefly: the injury, the surgery, the cost. There was silence. Then he said, "We just bought a new car." My mother's gentle voice came on next, lecturing me about responsibility. My brother laughed lightly and said, "You'll manage, you always do." I hung up and stared at the blood spreading through the gauze, fully understanding what the word permanent meant. 2 days later, there was a knock at the door. I dragged myself over to open it. My sister stood there, grease still on her hands, dark circles under her eyes after a 60-hour week at the auto shop. She looked at my leg and swore. Without asking a single question, she pulled out a thick wad of crumpled bills. $900. I sold all my tools. I need you to be able to walk. It wasn't enough, but it was everything I needed. Some people only show up when life is easy. My sister showed up when I needed it most. That night, I knew exactly who truly mattered. It happened on a routine workday at the small Texas public school, where the hallways always smelled faintly of old paper and chalk dust. Children's laughter drifted from distant classrooms, mixed with the occasional sharp bark of a teacher calling for quiet during transition time. I had just finished pulling a heavy cart of returned textbooks from the main reading room, the kind of stack that weighed enough to make my shoulders ache before I even reached the stairs. The staircase was narrow and worn steps creased from decades of small feet. I balanced the load carefully, one hand on the railing, the other steadying the books against my hip. Halfway down, my right boot snagged an uneven tread the edge had chipped years ago, and nobody ever fixed it. My knee twisted at an impossible angle. A sharp, wet pop ripped through the joint like a gunshot muffled inside flesh. Heat exploded outward in a burning rush, white noise flooded my ears, and the world tilted violently. Books flew from my arms, thudding and sliding in every direction. I crashed onto the landing hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. Pain swallowed everything sharp, relentless, replacing thought with static. I gripped the metal railing and tried to pull myself up. The leg buckled, completely useless, sending fresh fire up my thigh. Colleagues heard the commotion and came running, faces pale as they knelt beside me. Someone grabbed my phone and called the nurse. She arrived in minutes, helped me into a wheelchair, and insisted on an ambulance to the local hospital. The emergency room was a blur of antiseptic sting and low voices over intercoms. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting cold white glare across the narrow bed where they laid me. A nurse cut my pant leg open at the knee, exposing skin already ballooning tight and shiny, mottled purple and yellow, with darker bruising spreading underneath like spilled ink. They wheeled me to imaging. The MRI machine hummed and clacked while I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting cracks to stay calm. Back in the exam room, the physician's assistant pulled up the scans on the screen. The image glowed in stark grayscale, torn ligaments fluid, pooling possible meniscus damage. She tapped the monitor with her pen. "Significant ligament damage," she said, tone flat and professional. "You need surgery soon. $6,000 upfront if you go private public system. Wait is weeks out, maybe longer with backlogs. She paused, eyes meeting mine. If you wait, permanent limp is almost guaranteed. Limited mobility, chronic pain, maybe never fully weight-bearing again. The words landed like stones. I absorbed them without flinching outwardly. The issue wasn't the diagnosis, it was the clock. Texas public health approvals moved at glacial speed, paperwork stacking in offices, while my knee deteriorated. The PA lowered her voice slightly. Private clinics can schedule in days. Here's the estimate. She wrote the number on a scrap of paper and slid it across the tray table. $6,000. A number that felt both impossible and inevitable. Back in my apartment that evening, every crutch step jarred the wrapped leg, sending fresh throbs that radiated up my spine. The single room felt smaller than usual. Cluttered counters, a lone window overlooking cracked asphalt, and distant oil rigs silhouetted against the fading sky. I propped the leg on mismatched pillows, boot discarded on the floor like an abandoned shell, and pulled out my laptop to run the numbers. Credit cards hovered near their limits after last month's rent and utilities. Payday loan sites popped up in search results. Promises of quick cash with interest rates that climbed into triple digits, repayment schedules designed to trap. I calculated how much of my teacher's paycheck would vanish each month just to cover the minimums. Savings. A few $100s earmarked for car insurance renewal. Tutoring gigs or selling lesson plans online wouldn't bridge the gap fast enough. The doctor's warning looped in my head, permanent. Time I didn't have. I stared at the ceiling fans spinning slowly overhead, blades cutting shadows across the wall. Options narrowed to ugly choices. But the real pain wasn't the leg. It came when I called home. That night, the pain meds finally kicked in, dulling the sharp edges enough for my mind to wander where it shouldn't. Memories flooded in uninvited, pulling me back to summer evenings in my parents' backyard under the wide Texas sky. The air hung heavy with the smell of charcoal smoke and sizzling brisket fat dripping onto coals with sharp hisses. My father stood at the grill, tongs in hand, flipping steaks while sweat beaded on his forehead. My mother moved between the picnic table and the cooler, setting out paper plates, plastic cups of sweet tea, and bowls of coleslaw. Jason arrived late as usual, still in his button-down from some investor meeting, talking fast about his latest startup and app that promised to revolutionize local delivery. My father listened with rapt attention, nodding like every word was gold. "He's got potential," he said, voice thick with pride. "We have to support him. You don't build something big without taking risks." Right there at the table, he pulled out his checkbook, scribbled the amount without a second thought, thousands to fund another round after the previous venture had collapsed in months. No questions, no contracts, just a quick signature and a firm handshake. Jason pocketed the check with a grin, already launching into expansion plans. I sat on the edge of the group, picking at my plate, watching the exchange unfold, like a scene I'd witnessed too many times. The money flowed freely for him, framed as investment in the future. For me, it was always different. A few years back, I'd needed $2,000 to fix my car's transmission so I could keep driving to school every day. I asked them for a loan, not a gift, a loan with clear repayment terms. My father agreed, but only after printing a formal contract from his office computer. Interest at 5% notarized at the bank downtown to build character, my mother added with a nod. I signed it, then spent 6 months living on canned soup and ramen noodles, walking extra miles to save gas, scraping together every extra paycheck to pay them back early. They deposited the checks without comment. No congratulations, no relief, just the quiet assumption that I'd handle it, because I always had. Those moments had piled up quietly over the years. Jason's setbacks were learning experiences worth funding. Mine were opportunities to prove responsibility. I never asked for much, never raised my voice, never made waves. I stayed the reliable one, the one who figured things out so the family could keep moving forward without disruption. But that night, With the leg throbbing under the gauze and the doctor's words still ringing permanent, the pieces finally clicked into place. They had the resources. They simply chose not to direct them toward me. I picked up my phone and called Laura. She answered on the second ring, voice warm despite the late hour. I told her everything: the fall on the stairs, the MRI results, the $6,000 needed, the call home, the flat refusals. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief silence. "This isn't fair, Amanda," she said quietly. "You deserve better than being the backup plan." Looking back, those moments stack up the ones where you keep quiet because you're supposed to be the strong one. They add weight until one day the scale tips and you can't ignore it anymore. Something settled inside me then, cold and clear. The pattern made perfect sense. They had the money. They just didn't have it for me. I set the phone down. No more asking. No more waiting for permission or approval. From here on, I would handle it myself. 2 days later, the surgery took place at a small private clinic on the outskirts of town. The gurney metal felt icy through the thin gown as nurses wheeled me down the sterile hallway, fluorescent strips flickering overhead like slow pulses. The operating room smelled sharply of antiseptic and rubber machines beeping in quiet rhythm. A nurse smoothed the IV line into my arm, cool saline flowing steadily, while the anesthesiologist fitted the mask and told me to count backward from 10. My voice slurred at 6, then darkness swallowed the room completely. I came to in recovery with my leg elevated and wrapped in heavy bandages, a metal brace locked around the knee. The pain was different now, sharp and focused like a fire that had been contained rather than raging wild. The surgeon appeared at the bedside, chart in hand, face calm behind his mask. "We got it in time," he said. "Ligaments repaired, no further tearing visible. Full recovery is realistic if you commit to rehab, no skipping sessions, no rushing weight bearing." The words landed like a lifeline thrown across deep water. Relief surged through me so intensely my eyes stung. I managed a nod, throat constricted. The nurse helped adjust pillows, handed me crutches, and discharged me with a folder of instructions and a prescription for stronger pain meds. Laura was waiting in the parking lot car, running ready to drive me home. She carried the bags upstairs without complaint, unpacked containers of Tex-Mex from the spot near school, tacos, still steaming in foil, rice and beans, fragrant with cumin, fresh chips on the side. We ate on the couch, my leg propped high on pillows, her sitting cross-legged on the floor. She filled the quiet with school stories: the substitute teacher who mispronounced half the kids' names, the third grader who drew a get well card with a stick figure, me on crutches, holding a giant book. We laughed softly, the sound fragile but real, a small anchor in the haze of medication and uncertainty. The first loan payment posted 3 days later. I opened the bank app from the couch. $47 and change remained in the account. My next paycheck sat a full week away. The math refused to balance no matter how I rearranged it. I considered selling plasma at the donation center downtown, the one with the worn sign and fluorescent waiting room. I thought about posting the old bookshelf or coffee table on local buy-sell groups. Panic edged in, quiet and insistent. Then I remembered the receipt still crumpled in my jacket pocket from the gas station near the pharmacy, bottled water, crackers, and a scratch-off lottery ticket bought on impulse while waiting for the prescription to fill. I smoothed the paper flat on the coffee table, opened the app on my phone, and scanned the numbers once, then twice. They matched exactly. Not a massive jackpot, no headlines or flashing lights, but enough to cover the immediate payments, enough to stop the constant mental arithmetic that had kept me awake. Breath came easier for the first time in days. That small win felt heavier than the pain itself. It gave me room to think clearly about what came next and who I no longer wanted to protect. I dialed the lawyer downtown that same afternoon. His office sat on the third floor of a sleek glass building, quiet corridors and expensive silence. I maneuvered in on crutches, leg braced and throbbing with each step. He listened without interruption as I laid out the surgery, the loan terms, the family refusal. When I finished, I met his eyes directly. "I want two things," I said. "I want my assets protected, and I want to understand their finances better than they do." He studied me for a long moment across the polished desk. "That second part changes the approach," he said carefully. I nodded once. "That's exactly why I'm here." 3 weeks into recovery, I crutched through the glass doors of the lawyer's downtown office, the brace on my leg clicking against the marble floor with each careful step. The building was all sharp angles and quiet efficiency, muted lighting leather chairs that smelled faintly of polished elevators that whispered instead of groaning. He waited behind a wide oak desk folders, aligned like soldiers, and slid a thick one across the surface without a word. I lowered myself into the chair leg extended awkwardly and opened it. The pages spilled out in stark black and white mortgage statements, credit reports, loan documents that peeled back every layer of the life my parents had built on borrowed time. The house had been refinanced 3 times in the last 5 years, each pull stripping equity to plug holes elsewhere. The new car rode on a high-interest credit line that rolled over monthly, with fees compounding like interest on a bad bet. Jason's startup had hemorrhaged cash crypto trading apps that crashed with the market ad campaigns that never converted payroll met by dipping deeper into home equity lines already maxed and redlined. Taxes were tangled deductions, aggressive offshore accounts referenced in casual emails that had never been properly reported. The lawyer leaned forward, pointing to key lines with a steady finger. "They're not wealthy," he said evenly. "They're leveraged to the breaking point and maintaining the illusion." He explained Texas non-judicial foreclosure in plain terms: no courtroom drama, no long delays, just 21 days minimum notice before the process locked in, and the property could be sold at auction. The numbers told the story plainly. They had refused $6,000 to keep me walking while quietly burning tens of thousands to preserve a facade that was crumbling anyway. Numbers don't lie, but people do, especially when they think the rules don't apply to them. I closed the folder with a soft snap. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Relief from the surgery had long since faded into something colder clarity that sliced deeper than any scalpel. They had made choices. They had chosen not to include me. The lawyer waited, expression neutral. I looked up. "I don't want to shield myself from this," I said. "I want to own it." He raised an eyebrow but nodded once. "We outline the path forward, form a clean company shell with no traceable family links, approach the institutions holding the debt." Banks preferred clean books over troubled loans. They would sell at a discount to close the file. I would become the entity that held their fragile stability in my hands. Not out of revenge, but precision. The plan locked into place like a mechanism clicking shut. My phone buzzed as I left the building, sun low over the parking lot, casting long shadows across cracked asphalt. A text from Nicole. "How's the leg?" I paused on the crutches, thumb hovering, then typed back. "Getting there. Thanks again." She replied instantly with a thumbs-up emoji and a quick joke about borrowing my crutches if her knees ever gave out. I stared at the screen for a second, the small exchange cutting through the weight of the folder in my bag. It reminded me who had actually shown up when the bleeding started. I balanced carefully, leg steadier now with each step toward the car. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon orange and gold. The folder felt like evidence that patterns could be rewritten, that silence didn't have to be permanent. I slid into the driver's seat, crutches across the back, and started the engine. The road ahead looked different now. The paperwork moved faster than I expected. The company formed cleanly. No family names, no personal identifiers, just a neutral shell registered in a nondescript office park outside Austin. Banks moved quickly when bad loans threatened their quarterly reports. They sold the debt at a steep discount to clean their books and improve ratios. Within days, I held the notes on the house, the car, the lines of credit feeding Jason's failing ventures. Control shifted quietly and visibly, like a key turning in a lock no one knew existed. The meeting was set at a local coffee shop on the edge of town. the kind with worn wooden tables scarred from years of elbows and mugs. Ceiling fans spun lazily overhead, stirring humid air, thick with the strong scent of dark roast and fresh pastries baking in the back. Robert arrived first suit jacket, slung over his arm, looking pleased with himself as he scanned the room. Susan followed, purse clutched tight, eyes darting for anyone who might recognize them. Jason came last, phone in hand, already typing as he dropped into the chair. The intermediary, a calm voice on speaker with a faint British accent they always trusted more than their own instincts, handled the pitch smoothly. "We specialize in distressed assets," he explained. "We see value in your property and believe in retention strategies for families in transition. A sale-leaseback arrangement, immediate cash relief, no public foreclosure, no embarrassment. You stay in the home, maintain your lifestyle, even access a small line of credit to stabilize operations." Robert leaned back, arms crossed, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. "This is savvy," he said. "Strategic. We've been looking for something like this to get ahead." Susan asked careful questions, mostly about appearances, how it would look to neighbors, to friends at church, whether the paperwork would show up in public records. Jason jumped in with expansion talk, how the extra liquidity would finally push his app past the break-even point and into profitability. They skimmed the contract, 50 dense pages of legalese, eyes glazing over the dense paragraphs. Buried deep was the clause: any late payment, any misuse of funds, immediate termination of the lease possession, transferred without court delay or grace period. They didn't read it closely. Why would they? People like them never believed the fine print applied to them. They signed with flourish pens, scratching across paper in quick succession. Robert handed the document back with a nod. "Good doing business," he said. Susan smiled tightly. Jason was already back on his phone, typing furiously. The intermediary thanked them and ended the call. I listened to the recording later in my apartment, the sound of their voices confident and careless, laced with the low whir of the ceiling fan in the background. Something settled in my chest, not joy, not triumph, but finality. A door closing that had been left open too long. It's funny how some people believe the fine print is only for other people until it isn't. I stood up from the couch without reaching for the crutches. The leg held steady. I took one careful step, then another. No wobble, no sharp catch. The brace felt lighter now, almost unnecessary. I smiled, small and private. I could finally stand on my own. Weeks after the deal closed, my father called one evening, voice casual and rehearsed. "Hey, just checking in," he said. "Haven't heard from you in a while." I kept my response neutral. "I've been recovering." A pause stretched on the line. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "We've been busy, meetings, big changes." I said good, and let silence fill the space. No praise followed, no curiosity, no echo of the version of himself he wanted reflected back. He cleared his throat awkwardly and ended the call. Unease had crept into his tone, subtle but unmistakable. Thanksgiving arrived with the familiar performance. The house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon from excessive sides, stacked high mashed potatoes, whipped creamy green bean casserole, topped with crispy onions, cornbread dressing rich with sage rolls baked fresh that morning. Wine bottles lined the table, purchased on the line of credit they didn't realize was tightening month by month. Robert carved the bird slowly and ceremonially, knife flashing under the dining room chandelier, as if the act reaffirmed his authority. Susan fussed with place settings, adjusting napkins and candles for perfect symmetry. Jason arrived in a crisp new shirt, talking loudly about investors and expansion timelines. They raised glasses in a toast, to partners who see our value, not like those banks that only focus on numbers. Laughter followed agreement, rippled around the table, pride swelled in their voices. I sat at the far end, posture straight, legs steady beneath the cloth, sipping water in silence. They celebrated on money I controlled in a house I owned, congratulating themselves for outsmarting a system they had never truly understood. The irony hung thick in the air. 3 weeks later, the violation happened quietly. A payment scheduled for midnight processed late, perhaps a system glitch or simple oversight. The clause didn't distinguish intent. It operated on timestamps alone. At 12:01 a.m., the lease terminated automatically. Notices filed by morning clean and irreversible. I watched the confirmation populate on my screen, the system updating without drama or delay. The compliance review meeting was scheduled for the following week in a private conference room downtown. The intermediary framed it as routine. Robert and Susan arrived irritated 20 minutes late, complaining about traffic and immediately demanding coffee. Jason followed, phone still in hand. "Where's the senior partner?" Robert asked, voice edged with annoyance. "We don't have time for junior staff." I was already seated at the head of the table when I turned my chair slowly to face them. For a second, recognition didn't register. Then Susan's face drained of color. Robert's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Jason's phone slipped in his grip. "Hello, Mom, Dad," I said evenly. The room went still, thick silence pressing in from all sides. "I'll be handling this," I continued. "I'm the owner." The words landed precisely where intended. Susan began to cry. Not composed public tears, but raw panic, her Texas accent thickening as words tumbled out incoherently. "You tricked us," she whispered between sobs. Robert surged forward, anger flashing hot and immediate. "This is a joke. You think you're clever. We'll sue in small claims, drag this out, expose you to everyone." Jason's voice sharpened to a cutting edge. "You always take it too far." Laura sat quietly in the corner, witnessing every moment, her presence steady and unyielding. Security stepped closer as Robert's voice rose, threats spilling faster than he could control them. He mentioned accounts he shouldn't have, offshore details he thought were buried. I listened without interrupting, letting him reveal more with every word. When he finally ran out of steam, I placed a single document on the table. "I reported that," I said quietly, "weeks ago, with evidence from your own slips." The room froze completely. Susan's sobs hitched into silence. Robert stared, face ashen. Jason looked away, phone forgotten in his lap. The air felt charged, final, like the moment before a storm breaks. The fallout started quietly a week after the meeting. A notice appeared taped to the front door on heavy official paper, the language cold and precise: lease terminated, effective immediately. Possession transferred, eviction proceedings under Texas non-judicial rules already in motion. Locks were changed the same afternoon by a service crew, no raised voices, no spectacle for neighbors to film or gossip about. The house stood empty within days, windows dark, driveway empty of cars. Furniture vanished, sold off quickly or left behind in haste. Neighbors began whispering at church on Sundays, careful questions asked behind cupped hands, stories shifting depending on who was asking and who was listening. My mother left the first voicemail. It was long and broken, half-finished sentences, dissolving into sobs, then attempts at composure that cracked again. She spoke of how hard things had always been, how she'd done her best under difficult circumstances, how family was supposed to forgive misunderstandings. The word sorry never appeared, only "how could you" repeated like a broken record, raw and pleading. My father called next. No tears, just rage pouring through the line. "You think this makes you powerful? We'll sue, drag your name through every court we can find. Make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of daughter you are." Threats came fast, lawsuits and small claims, public exposure, connections he claimed still existed. He mentioned offshore accounts, again details, slipping out in anger that he never intended to reveal. I listened without speaking, letting him unravel further with every sentence. When the tirade ended, I spoke once. "I know," I said. "That's why I filed the report." The line went dead. Jason tried showing up at my apartment unannounced. He knocked hard, then pounded when I didn't answer. Through the door, his voice started low and urgent, shifting to sharp frustration. "You didn't have to do this. We could have figured something out." I leaned against the wood, listening. You always take it too far, he said. Make everything extreme. I laughed once quietly. Extreme? I repeated through the door. Like refusing $6,000 for surgery. His tone hardened. That's not fair. No, I thought. It never was. He lingered a minute longer, then left footsteps echoing angrily down the hall, phone already out calling someone else to fix the mess. Foreclosure proceeded swiftly under Texas rules, no courtroom delays, just notices counting down relentlessly. The house emptied completely, memories packed into boxes or discarded. Neighbors whispered more openly at church stories circulating in hushed tones during coffee hour. The IRS probe opened quietly after I submitted evidence from their own emails and statements, offshore accounts, unreported deductions, questionable income streams hidden. Accounts froze, investigations deepened. Jason's startup imploded under the pressure, creditors called in loans, investors withdrew bankruptcy, filed within months. He moved to a cheap apartment on the far side of town, far from the life he'd projected. I helped Nicole buy the auto shop she'd worked at for years. The paperwork was straightforward, new tools, ordered signage updated with her name. When she walked through the door the first day and saw her nameplate, pride lit her eyes in a way I'd never seen. She hugged me tightly, no words needed, just quiet gratitude that filled the space between us. One crisp fall afternoon in Texas, I went for a walk, no crutches, no brace, just steady steps through cool air and drifting leaves. I ran for the first time on a quiet path near the base stride, tentative at first, then longer, smoother. The leg held strong, reliable. I slowed to a walk and laughed out loud, the sound surprising even me, echoing in the empty air. Family isn't blood, it's who refuses to let you bleed alone. I stopped saving them and found something steadier. Thank you all for taking the time to watch the video. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to leave a comment, sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos.